This is my 50th book review on Rev Reads, and I received a few requests to do a tour of my personal library. You can see some of it right there behind me. So I have my Old Testament commentaries on one side, I have my New Testament commentaries on the other, my Bibles and some Greek works that I have there in the middle. And I plan on doing a tour of that library eventually, but I don't want to do a tour of my print library first. The reason is that I don't do the majority of my reading on my print library. I actually do the majority of my reading on my Kindle. So I'm going to do a tour of my Kindle library, and once I get to either 100 subscribers for my channel or I get to my 100th book review, whatever comes first, I'll then do a tour of my print library. So if you want to see my print library, you can subscribe to the channel to help it happen a little bit quicker. Here is a tour of my Kindle library. Welcome to my Kindle homepage, home to approximately 325 books on my Kindle. So start off telling you a little bit about how I have this laid out at the beginning. I have two folders in my Kindle. One contains all my Bibles, the other contains all my commentaries. I only like having two folders on the Kindle because I'm normally reading about 4 books at a time, and this allows me to have all of my current reads and my two folders right when I open up my Kindle. I want to point out Oathbringer, Sean Wilson, on the front homepage. That's not a book called Oathbringer by Sean Wilson. Brandon Sanderson wrote that book. This is a PDF of the chapter synopsis of the book Oathbringer that I copied onto a PDF and put on my Kindle. So I just want to note to anybody who's watching this that you can put PDFs on your Kindle. So now on to my commentaries. First, my commentary on Romans. I read that all the way through before I started preaching on Romans. That's by Zane Hodges, and I'd encourage anybody who's reading through that book to look at his perspective because most people don't share his perspective, and it's a good one to look at. There's also my New International Commentary on the Old Testament on the book of Psalms. Probably my most disappointing volume in that entire series. I just didn't find a lot there for each of the Psalms. And also Holman New Testament Commentary. You're going to see a lot of that series, the Holman Old Testament and New Testament Commentary series. I think that is a great book to look at as your 4th or 5th commentary if you're going to read that many while preaching through a book. It just gives you a short, concise, extra viewpoint of looking at a passage, and they're always very well written. So I recommend the Holman Old Testament and New Testament Commentary series. It'd be one to get the entire set, and I have a lot of them here on my Kindle. They aren't very expensive. And then moving on, we have my commentaries on the book of 1 Peter. I preached through all of that book. The best commentary on 1 Peter on that page is the one by David's, the New International Commentary on the New Testament. Probably my least favorite is Sproul's. Sproul just gets too far off on tangents, and I'm just not thrilled with how he does commentaries. He gets off context too often. And then the Gospel According to John by Carson. Carson always does wonderful work looking at the text, and even if I don't agree with his theology all the time, I definitely want to consult with what he's going to say about a passage and its meaning. And then we're going to see a lot of my commentaries on Colossians there. There's 3 of them. I preached all the way through Colossians at one point during my pastoral ministry. The best commentary on Colossians was by Moo, again in that Pillar series. Also Sam Storms. It's a collection of meditations on the book of Colossians, so you might not pick it up as a commentary, but I would highly recommend Sam Storms' The Hope of Glory if you're preaching through the book of Colossians. There are a few commentaries on the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. I preached through the lives of Elisha and Elijah at one point. Out of those 3 that are on this page, Houses is the best. My favorite commentary on 1st and 2nd Kings I only have in print, and I'll mention that when I do a tour of my print library. William Lane's commentary on the Gospel of Mark was great. Highly recommend that as well. And so was Edwards. Those are 2 great commentaries on James if you're going to preach through that book of the Bible. On this page, more Holman New Testament commentaries, another commentary by Sproul. Again, I just get frustrated with him because he gets off of context too much. NIV application commentaries. I bought several of them when they were a really great deal on the Kindle at one point, so follow Gospel eReads so that you can see when those are. And then I also have the NIV commentary, application commentary on Esther there, and I do want to note that by Karen Jobs because that's the best commentary I've read on Esther, and I never end up saying that the NIV application commentary is the best on a single book of the Bible, but Karen's work on Esther was the best. And then one of the best commentaries ever written, Martin Luther's commentary on Galatians. I think you can get that for free on the Kindle, so how can you not pick that up? One of the best commentaries we've ever had is Luther's on Galatians. Preached through Exodus as well. Stewart's work in the New American Commentary was all right, nothing overly to blow you away. I preached through James, and again, Moo's work was the best that I read on James. I'd like to go back through and preach through James now that I've changed some of my views and shifted closer toward free grace, because I'd like to preach through James with Hodge's commentary on hand, and hopefully at one point in my ministry I'll be able to do that. So, but out of the ones that I read on James, I thought Moo's was the best. And here are some commentaries I picked up because they were basically a good deal. Christ-centered expositions. They were all on sale for $1.99 at one point, and so I picked up several of them. And I have a bunch of Holman New Testament and Old Testament commentaries, and again, I picked them up when they've been a good deal, and so I have some of them just sitting on my Kindle. Same thing for this page. I do highly recommend Bruce's commentary on Philippians. I always want to read what F.F. Bruce has to say on a passage if he's written on it, and there's his commentary on Philippians, and we also have his commentary on Hebrews, which is one of the best commentaries that have ever been written on the book of Hebrews. So there are the 65 commentaries that I get to carry around with me everywhere because I keep them on a Kindle. And now let's move on to the Bibles. So back to the home page, and we'll go onto my folder for the Holy Bible, where you can see I have 11 Bibles on my Kindle. The Christian Standard Bible, which I liked more than I expected to, so I do recommend that translation of the Bible. The English Heritage Version, which I like way, way more than I expected to. Lutheran translation of the Bible. Wonderful job balancing the textual, the critical text and the majority text, so I'm a huge fan of what they've done with the Evangelical Heritage Version. I just wish it was easier to get. New King James Version, I did a video on that if you want to know my thoughts on the NKJV. And the NASB, which I love because it was the Bible that I was reading when I first learned Greek, and so I have that sort of good feelings about it whenever I open it up. The Koine Greek New Testament is actually a majority text Greek New Testament, but it's kind of a bear to look through. Then I have a New Living Translation of the Bible, an English Standard Version, which at a time was my favorite translation, but it's fallen down the list a little bit by some other ones. I got 2 Holman Christian Standard Bibles on the Kindle because one of them was free, and I found it for free after I had already purchased the digital reference edition. But the digital text edition is easier for just reading through the Bible on the Kindle. And the Net Bible, I'm just impressed that that's on the Kindle because it's a huge download, and I can still fit all of the other 300 plus books on there, even with the big Net Bible and all the notes that it has. And then there is Hart's New Testament translation, which I wasn't a huge fan of. So let's move now on to the regular books that I have on my Kindle. We are back on the main home page. I'm not going to talk about every book that's on here, just sort of hitting a sample of a few of them. One thing I do want to note is that if you do see a red in the top right-hand corner of the book, that means that I have completed it. If you can read the percentage numbers, that tells you how far I've gotten in a book, although I think I have a few where that isn't correct. Some books that I haven't read when I really have. Basic Christianity by John Stott. Really disappointed in that, but I'll do a review on that soon, explaining why. And then Leland Gregory's Stupid Science, which is in his series of stupid books that make for wonderful sermon illustrations. So now we'll move on to the next page. We have 2 volumes, the first 2 volumes of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. I completed reading all of the first volume probably about a year or two ago, and it just dawned on me that I didn't keep going through the Ante-Nicene Fathers. So I recently just picked up the second volume to start reading that in 2021. I love The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment, a great classic that everybody should read on the importance of the character trait of contentment. And then there are 3 books that I all plan on reading in the near future. And then we have the book I love by Snap, his fresh analysis of John 7:53 through 8:11, which I reviewed recently. The Work of His Hands, a book that I actually have a review written. I just got to record it and put it out, which hopefully will come out sometime this year. A Free Grace Primer, a collection of 3 of Zane Hodge's books. And then The Guts of Grace by Grant Holley. I recommend that collection of lessons for pastors who are teaching in your church. Who is This Man? I think that's a great apologetic work by John Ortberg to convince the unbeliever in the importance of Jesus and why we should trust his offer for eternal life. The Masculine Mandate and Road to Rewards, those are 2 books I'm looking forward to reading next year. I'm also a fan of G. Campbell Morgan. I like to read his books and get his thoughts. I like occasionally reading guys who are removed from our current society and world and seeing their different perspectives on the text. And then I have a lot of John Bunyan books on my Kindle because they were free when I got my Kindle, and I picked up as many free books as I could early on. And then it's interesting that Vintage Church and Vertical Church are both side by side with Mark Driscoll and James MacDonald. Didn't do a great job picking books by those guys with what they've ended up doing, but I read those. And Holy Fire by Kendall, wasn't a huge fan of that book by R.T. Kendall. Disagreed with a lot of what he says. I'd put in the classic category. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. John Ortberg's bestseller. I have a sample of a Reader's Greek New Testament. When I got $25, I really hope to purchase that and put that on there and be able to use that just regularly when I'm out with my Kindle. Hopefully that it's a little bit easier to navigate than the Greek New Testament I currently have on there. The best book that I found on the reliability of the manuscripts that back up the New Testament is F.F. Bruce's Are They Reliable? The New Testament Documents. So I recommend that book as a pretty easy to read book if somebody's questioning whether or not we can trust the Bible that we have. It's a great work on that. Then a couple of great old biographies. Going to say great for all these books that I think are great. I feel like I'm saying that word all the time. But John Huss, wonderful short biography by him and Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secrets. Obviously, that is well known. The Me I Want to Be is a good book to go through by Ortberg. 3 biographies here, one on Luther, one on Bunyan, one on John Wycliffe. Out of those 3, Wycliffe's is the best. His life and time period where he lived was just fascinating and so different from our own. So read a good biography on Wycliffe. And then we have Heaven by Randy Alcorn, my favorite book on eternity and on heaven, right next to Love Wins by Rob Bell, which is probably my least favorite book on eternity and where we will end after we die. And then obviously you can always recommend to everybody selections from the Table Talk of Martin Luther. That was a really inexpensive book. Then we have Slave by John MacArthur, which is probably the best book that MacArthur has written. Another couple of Bunyan books. Not a huge fan of either one of those in spite of their popularity. The Practice of the Presence of God, though, by Brother Lawrence. I really recommend that book. I love The Practice of the Presence of God. If you have not read it, it's about the importance of always having a mindset where we're coming before God in prayer and speaking with Him daily, regardless of how mundane our tasks are in life. The Great Divorce is my favorite book by C.S. Lewis. I have a print copy, but I like it so much I wanted to have a copy on my Kindle. Not sure why the real cover isn't on there. Amazing Grace by Eric Metaxas. That was my favorite of Metaxas's biographies. His one by Luther is my second favorite, but I have that in print. Answers to Prayer from George Mueller. You should read the full George Mueller biography, and not just that Answers to Prayer from George Mueller. His full biography is much better, and it's worth reading the whole one through. A few books by Francis Chan. I was really into him for a little while. A book that I'd recommend for people who have little kids and they're tearing their hair out right now. My kids, when they were toddlers, is probably why I'm bald now. Called And Then I Had Kids, so a good book on parenting little ones. E.M. Bound's complete collection on prayer I recommend. The Brothers Are Not We Are Not Professionals might be the book by Piper I would recommend the most, although I don't find myself now at all recommending any of John Piper's books. And now we have Confessions of Augustine. I wish I could get back the time that I spent reading that book, one of my least favorite books that I have read. A Life of Obedience by Andrew Murray was a wonderful book, though. And then Sticky Church, High Expectations, two books that are great about how to bring people into your church and then get them to stay in your church and not want to run away at a moment's notice. I also really enjoyed the 1 Year Christian History, just a good devotional book to go through one time at least in your life to just hit on those major events in Christian history. So I highly recommend the 1 Year Christian History book. It's a good one to have. It's also full of plenty of good sermon illustrations for the pastor. I was into 9 Mark books for a little while, so there's the 9 Marks, The Healthy Church, also 9 Marks' book on discipline. I agree with some of what they say, some of what they don't, so you can encourage you to read it for yourself and see what it has to say if you have not read 9 Marks. The Death of Death and the Death of Christ by John Owen. That's another book like Augustine's Confession that I wish I could get back the time that I spent reading that book, and I wish that we could have somebody go through that book as an editor. A few more biographies. John Edwards' book on David Brainerd, which is so challenging. George Whitfield's biography, which I encourage people to read to see George Whitfield in his own context. Really controversial guy. And then we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit by Bruce Ware. That might be my favorite book on the Trinity. I just really enjoyed it. I thought Ware's thoughts were wonderful. The Gospel in Genesis by Martin Lloyd-Jones. I liked what he had to say on that. I really recommend that. The Lord of the Ring, a book about Zinzendorf. I did not know what I was getting into reading that, but I was so glad that I did. It is a wonderful biography. It's about Zinzendorf and the work that he did, and everybody should read The Lord of the Ring. Again, John Edwards, I put him in the category of Augustine, somebody I've read more than I wish that I had. The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Keller. That's my favorite Keller book. Really short, really great stuff on how we should view ourselves in light of Christ. To the Summit by Nick Allen. I know Nick Allen, and his journey of his struggle with MS is so inspiring, and if you know somebody who's dealing with MS and they are downcast and disheartened about it, get them a copy of To the Summit by Nick Allen. What is God's Will for My Life by John Ortberg. I actually own 5 or 6 copies of that. It's really small and short. It's great for a gift for high school grads to give out to them. Turn and Live by Robert Wilkin changed the way that I view repentance, and I recommend that highly. There's another Whitfield biography that I've read, and then Ladd's Blessed Hope. I do enjoy reading Ladd and pretty much everything that he has. I've gotten a lot out of, even if I don't agree with everything Ladd says. I always am happy I've read his books. All right, we got one book that I highly recommend, God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel. I've written a review about how important it is, and I'm going to stand by that we should be passing this book out in light of the hold the prosperity gospel has on so many lives. Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary was wonderfully well written. Gentle and Lowly and Beyond Doubt, 2 of my favorite books from last year. The New Jim Crow was a very eye-opening book by Michelle Alexander. A friend passed that on to me, and so I read it through. If you give me a book, most likely I'll read it. Here's 2 books that I like having side by side: Cities of God and the Lives of Ordinary People in Ancient Israel. Cities of God shows us what life was like in the urban areas during the days of the New Testament and the early church. The Lives of Ordinary People in Ancient Israel shows us what the lives of rural individuals and a lot of city dwellers were like in the period of the divided kingdom. So if you want to get background of what it was like to live during those time periods, those are 2 books that I highly, highly recommend. I posted a review on the Lives of Ordinary People in Ancient Israel. Not many people watch it, but hopefully I'll do it on Cities of God. People probably won't watch that either. Here are 6 books that I don't have a lot to say about, except for, the Your Clippings file. That is the collection of notes that I have taken on my Kindle, and you can always take the documents off of Your Clippings and drop them into a Word document, so you get your notes that you copy. Your highlights can get dropped from your Kindle right onto your computer thanks to the Your Clippings. And this also illustrates how out of order my Kindle is, because normally Your Clippings is right toward the front. Freed to Lead, that is the leadership book by F3 Nation. If you want to have male adult friends, if you're a man and you need a good workout in the morning, please join F3, learn about it. So F3's Free to Lead is their leadership book. After Acts is a little disappointing, wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. It's about the lives of the apostles after the book of Acts. Behold the Lamb of God. I really recommend that on celebrating the Messiah in the Passover. It's a great book for everybody to read, and also to have a Passover service that's also similar to what Jesus probably would have done in his own time. Christ in the Feast in the Passover is again a great book on celebrating the celebrating the Jewish feasts and celebrating them with a focus on Jesus Christ. So you can see how Jesus was the fulfillment of each of those. Kingdom Come by Sam Storms is a great book on amillennialism. If you want to know more about that eschatology system, if you want one of the best defenses that have been put out by of amillennialism, I'd suggest Kingdom Come. Everyone who is a premillennialist or a postmillennialist should read it to understand those who are amillennialists. And if you don't know anything about historic premillennialism, there's good work that explains what that eschatology system is. I always recommend for people to not only learn about dispensationalism as I am, but also other eschatology systems. Thriving in Babylon by Larry Osborne, really enjoyed that work, which he takes us through the book of Daniel. I hope to use it once I get to the point in my ministry when I decide to preach through that book. From Weakness to Strength by Scott Sauls is a wonderful book about leadership that I highly recommend to all pastors in the church. And then there's another 9 Marks book, 9 Marks the Church. The Quran, there it is, the English translation of the Quran that I have on my Kindle. It's as terrible as you'd expect it to be, but I also think that every pastor should read through the Quran. So if you have an opportunity to witness to a Muslim, you can do it from a point of knowledge and understanding to better share with them Jesus Christ. The Gospel Call and True Conversion by Paul Washer is one of those books that falls into the category where I say no one should read it, because it's really the gospel call and works-based conversion, and that doesn't save people. It's faith in Jesus Christ that saves. The Anabaptist Story is a great book on everything the Anabaptist Christians suffered during the period of the Reformation, so we should know about their sacrifice for the gospel and for religious liberty as well. We got to the autobiography of George Mueller. Everybody should read through this. If you haven't read it, the autobiography of George Mueller, put it on your must-read list for 2021. And now we have The Great Fire by Lou Urenick, which I highly recommend. I did a video review on that. It's one of those ones that hasn't gotten watched a lot because who knows anything about The Great Fire, but I really recommend that. Jesus in the Present Tense by Wiersbe was also probably my favorite book that Wiersbe wrote out of the who knows how many that he wrote. A really good book about Christ and who he is. And then some books that honestly I haven't seen in so long that it is tough to tell you anything about them. Don't have a lot of memories of Soul Keeping, Shaped by the Gospel by Tim Keller. I just remember that being a little bit disappointing as a pastor who works in a urban area. I expected a little bit more from that book and didn't get what I was hoping for. Wonderful biography by Menno Simons. His life, labors, and teaching. It has a lot of quotations and sections about Menno's actual teaching, and I love Menno Simons, and really good work on him and what he gave us in church history. The Doctrine of God by Frame. It's a long work on the theology proper. And so it's a good book to go through to basically give you all the teachings out there on theology proper. I don't always agree with Frame's conclusions, but it was a good book on God. And then a couple more books that I got at the Luther 500th anniversary. There's a couple more, I think, on the next page that's going to come up. Faith Alone, The Doctrine of Justification by Schreiner actually moved me away from the Calvinist view. Safely Home by Randy Alcorn, a book that is a fiction. And I wish I would have known it was a fiction when I started it. So if you read Safely Home by Randy Alcorn, just know that you're reading a fiction book. There are 10 works by Martin Luther in one volume. A daily devotional of quotes by Martin Luther, which was really good. I really do recommend that. And then a good biography on Martin Lloyd-Jones by Catherwood. Lloyd-Jones lived a fascinating life, so it's a good biography on him. I highly recommend The Law of Rewards by Randy Alcorn, a wonderful book about laying up treasures in heaven as opposed to laying up treasures here on earth, and that's the perspective that really we should all have in the church. We should live for eternity and not for today. Then a book on Islam by Hanegraaff that I don't really recommend too much. It was all right, but read the Quran. Don't read that if you want to witness to Muslims. And The Strategy of Satan, an all right book on spiritual warfare. Nothing earth-shattering, but it's okay. So there's my Kindle. If you have any questions about any books that I skipped over and didn't talk about, ask me in the comments and I'll try to answer you. And let me know if there's any books I have in here that you would say, oh, Sean, you definitely need to read that had a 0% read. And I'll make sure that's on my list for 2021. So if you are interested in seeing reviews by a guy who has all of these books on his Kindle, please subscribe to the Rev Reads YouTube channel.